I talked a little bit about just autism acceptance in general, and then I presented on autism acceptance in relation to communication. And so I wanted to really get into one of my favorite topics, sensory, right? And this is the one that is, I mean, if I were to think about, a book to write, that would be a funny book. It would just be a book filled with stories of things that our children do that we don't understand, and just the reactions of parents when I explain to them why their child is doing that. And because the sensory processing component is real, it's so real. So let's talk about that. All right. Sensory integration makes it really difficult for a lot of autistic individuals to navigate the environment. And I say this in this simple phrase, but it has a lot packed into it. So if I think about a child having to navigate the classroom, navigating the classroom means you have to process the other children, which is sounds, right? Smells, Mary's strawberry shampoo that is just so strong. That has to be processed. And if you have struggles with sensory integration efficiency, then that's going to be difficult for you to navigate centers with the girl who has the ponytail that swings back and forth next to the girl who smells like strawberry shortcake because her mom likes strawberry flavored shampoo. And so it's not so much that a child is not complying, right? They're not being difficult. And of course, we all know autism is not a behavior disorder. So why is that, right? Why is it difficult for that child to navigate that environment during centers with those two sensory overload situations? That's why. I mean, it's really that simple, even though it is multi-layered and hard for those of us who don't have sensory integration challenges. It's hard to understand how that strawberry shampoo or the sound of the vacuum cleaner could be annoying, right? What do we always say? It's not that loud. It's okay. It's okay. We all say that. It's okay. Which brings me to my first point of it's not okay, right? And so when we say it's okay, it really isn't okay to the autistic individual. And we just need to say, I'm really sorry that you're in this situation. And of course, if we can do something about it, then it's our responsibility to adjust the environment. What does that look like? Earlier in a session, I spoke to a mom who, unbeknownst to her, she'd never heard of sensory processing, but she realized when she used the blender, when she had to use the vacuum cleaner, that her child was in distress. And so she arranged her environment. She altered her schedule to accommodate her daughter's needs without even knowing that there was a legitimate reason, right? But she could see that she was in distress. And that is autism acceptance with the sensory component. It is not making the child tolerate the sound. It's not, oh, you'll get over it. It's not telling them, it's okay, it's just the vacuum. And I say that because I hear teachers say that all the time to students while the child is screaming in the corner with their hands over their ears because it's just so overwhelming. But because the individual that is autistic, that has a disability that we cannot see, right? We can't see the sensory processing going on. We can't see the communication, executive functioning, different way of processing information. So we have to remember that an autistic individual, yes, it is a disability, but that doesn't mean they can't go out into the world and navigate it. So it's our responsibility to adjust the environment for them. And I get pushback on this in the schools, right? Well, I mean, if I do it for them, then I have to do it for everyone. Well, yeah, you do. You have to do it for everyone. You need to make accommodations for everyone. If someone needs to sit in a quieter place, even if they don't have sensory processing difficulties, as a teacher, as an educator, as a responsible adult, you need to accommodate a child to meet their needs, right? I'm not saying that we need to baby children. I'm saying there are simple things that we can do in the environment. And if a child needs a yoga ball to sit on to get that proprioceptive input in the classroom, then that's what we need to provide. And it's not about, oh, what if, all the other kids are going to want? The other kids don't want it because they don't need it. We just simply don't need it. Everyone's not trying to wear someone's glasses because they have glasses. The children aren't trying to fight and get in the wheelchair, although some kids like to try to sneak a ride down the hallway. But children are not going to want something they don't need, right? And if they don't need the sensory input, they're not going to want to grab all of the sensory fidgets because they simply don't need them. I have an array of fidgets at my beck and call at all times, right? They're all over my house. They're everywhere because I use them to demonstrate or to explain. I don't need a sensory fidget, right? I don't use a sensory fidget. I've tried to use a sensory fidget and it just annoys me, right? Which is understandable because I seem to do okay, right? I'm not saying I don't have some issues. I'm saying that even though I have those available to me, I don't just walk around with a squeezy ball or sit with a squeezy ball because I don't need it, right? It's the same for our kids who need sensory input. Sometimes they may not need the fidget, right? But you want to have it available for them so that they can access it. So what does it look like for us to adjust the environment, for us to take the responsibility to accommodate individuals so they can navigate independently? I mean, you guys know that is so important for kids to be able to grow up into adults that can navigate their environment. So we have to support them. All right. This is, this is the theme of this series, is me sort of sharing quotes from Judy Endow. And once again, she has approved in the manner that I am sharing the quotes. But Judy Endow has a blog, and so I go through the blog and pull things that I think resonate with the message that I'm trying to give to anyone and everyone who participates in this webinar, whether it's live or the replay. And so she talks about the fact that autistics are required to make numerous accommodations every day they are among people, right? And think of the classroom. And this is because our world is not set up neurologically in a neurologically friendly way for autistic individuals who have difficulties with sensory integration. She states, we live in a fast-paced world. Speed, understanding, responding to people is expected very quickly. We also have a lot of information being delivered over numerous electronic devices, and everything is supposed to happen instantly. So thinking of how those of us who are not sort of trying to regulate a sensory system that's not working as efficiently, how overwhelming things are for us, right? I was sitting in the meeting and I have one phone telling me there's a text message, another phone telling me there's an email, right? And then, ding dings on my laptop during the meeting, lots of things for me to process, right? And I had to work hard at processing them and to maintain participation in the meeting. Imagine how a child who is trying to navigate those situations, or an adult that is struggling with that integration component, right? So we need to remember that they're working very hard, very, very hard to navigate school, grocery store, a conversation, simple things like just answering questions. You all have heard me talk in reference to when I speak to friends of mine who are also autistic individuals. Sometimes we have to stop the conversation and go to text messaging because maybe there's a lot going on, or maybe they will take their video off and just go to chatting instead of participating verbally during a meeting because there's a lot to process, right? And they want to participate. And so that accommodation works, right? It's okay. You can bend the rules. Everyone doesn't have to be on the video because it's important for that individual to be able to participate. And so making those adjustments is not something that we should fight, right? Just do it. Just do it. I mean, I say that all the time in the classroom. Just accommodate, get over yourself as an educator and accommodate a child who needs to be in an environment that's set up for their success. All right. So this is a quote in terms of a child giving perspective. When my parents ask me questions about something I really love, rather than how was my day, how was your exam, who did you eat lunch with today, I am more likely to open up. And I put this here because I want you to think about this because it's related to communication and that processing system, but it's also related to the sensory overload that our children are experiencing and tolerating and managing and navigating with lots of hard work. And sometimes it's not possible to navigate. They come home and they don't need to be bombarded. Remember, they are coming home after sometimes masking, right? Not getting the sensory input. So they're dysregulated. And then they have more demands put on them as soon as they walk through the door. And as adults, how many of us walk in the room after the house after work? And when you're bombarded, it's like, whoa, give me just a second, right? It's overwhelming, but your sensory system is working efficiently. So you're able to manage that, right? You're able to communicate that you need 5 minutes. Sometimes our kids cannot communicate that. So it is up to us to accept the fact that even though we're excited about hearing about their day, what happened? Did you eat your lunch? Well, all these things, we need to accept that they are probably processing information from the day and they have probably exhausted their sensory system doing the things that are mandated by the school setting. And we just need to accept that. We may not be able to share or talk with them right now. Or maybe I need to ask them something about their interest and then later ask them about their day because they need time to come home and decompress and to regulate. And that's where that sensory diet, all those activities that I provide to families, and some of you are included, it helps. All right, another quote from Judy, because I firmly believe that the key to accepting, understanding, appreciating autism is listening to autistic individuals. That's how I learned, and that's how I think it is a great way for all of us to learn. So Judy says, I used to get surprised by my unreliable sensory system quite a lot as I went about my daily life. These days, I get less surprised because I've learned to do a sensory scan of new environments to identify upfront what sorts of things will likely negatively impact me. So I want you all to just sit on that sentence for a minute. I've learned to do a sensory scan of new environments to identify upfront what sorts of things might negatively impact my sensory system. Children know what they need to do, whether they're young, whether they're teens, whether they're adults. They know they need to protect their sensory system. They don't know if a new environment is going to be a sensory safe environment. So what do? They stop. They drop to the floor. They won't go in. And what do? Come on, it's going to be great. We pull, we keep trying to encourage. What we should do to help them scan the environment, give them the opportunity to look and see, just wait. Give them time. If you can, social stories, visuals in the car, right? Pull it up on Google, take pictures. You don't always have the ability to make a social story or know sometimes if you have to go to a different place. Use your technology. If you can provide them with information, then they can start to process and prepare, and then give them time. And when you give them time, part of accepting that they need to process an environment is stop trying to convince them of something different. Just stop. Just accept. I don't understand what the sensory overload is, but I know they need this. They may need 10 minutes. They may need 30 minutes to look through the window and decide if it's a good spot for them to go to, right? Now, to help with that, of course, is having that sensory bag, right? That I always tell parents to have prepared in the car when you go anywhere so that you can have some ways for your child to regulate when they do have an environment that can be overwhelming. The other thing is to think about sometimes it's going to be inconvenient, right? Sometimes you may not be able to go into the store or the restaurant. Sometimes the family may have to do things separately. Yes, I understand that's frustrating, but it is far better to have experiences with the family that are positive than to have meltdowns and then everyone's frustrated. And you can prepare, you can plan. This is going into the rest of her comment. It takes a few minutes when she walks into a new classroom, a store, a friend's home to look around, identify what's too much for her sensory system, and then she can quickly figure out how to minimize the impact of the sensory assault. Assault, that's what it feels like on her system. Now, Judy is an adult. She can express this. Our children are feeling the same thing, but they can't express that. So that's why we're here, right? We're learning. We're all trying to understand what we can do because it's real. And one of the things that we do a lot, besides trying to convince them that it's going to be okay, is we try to talk them into doing something faster, right? So let's say that your child needs to scan a new environment. You're allowing them to scan the new environment. Don't talk them through it. Look, see, there's a trampoline in the back. Oh, look, Betsy's there. You like Betsy. That's more things for them to process. Like all that verbal. And I've said it once and I'll say it all the time. If I can not communicate verbally and be quiet, anyone can, right? I am a verbal processor. But it is important for our kids when they are trying to process and scan an environment, when they're trying to process a new sensory environment, they don't need verbal input to process as well. It can be very overwhelming. And a lot of times, if you just sit for a few minutes quietly and just let them explore, just stand there looking, it doesn't take them long. Like she said, I scan my environment and then I prepare. Now, for our children, that's not always going to be as simple. And there are some things that we don't have control over. So it's understanding and accepting the fact that the sensory component is real and I may need to make an adjustment that may be very inconvenient for me. But for the person, the individual who is trying to process all of that sensory information and it can go into overload, we have to understand their needs sometimes supersede ours or our inconvenience, right? And I get it. I'm not saying that I don't understand. It's difficult. It's frustrating. It's annoying. Oh my gosh, it's another thing. I totally get it. But when you get into the routine of understanding how you can make those adjustments, how you can accommodate, accepting that you need to make those accommodations, and then you teach your child how to ask for what they need and how to make their own accommodations as they get older, it really does make it less chaotic. And I'm speaking this from experience in terms of the reason my classroom, the majority of the time, yes, there are still meltdowns, the reason that there is less chaos than more is because I'm constantly proactively doing every accommodation I could possibly think of. I mean, I don't know if anybody has a problem with the fluorescent lights, but mine are covered just in case, right? Because I really just want to avoid chaos, but I also want to set up a really sensory safe environment for my students. Now, sometimes that's hard when you have siblings, and that's where those strategies on turn taking come into play. But let me go back to the idea and the concept of this presentation, which is accepting that sometimes we have to allow our child to scan an environment. Don't say, oh, they're shy. Don't make up excuses for them. If somebody says something, which sometimes family members do, then just simply say, they're scanning the environment and making sure that it's sensory safe for them. That's it. Just be honest about it, right? All right. If your child comes home from school exhausted or stressed and anticipates they might be asked a series of questions about their well-being, they might isolate themselves to avoid that exhaustion of answering. So the reason this fits into sensory acceptance is because your child is coming home from school exhausted, overwhelmed, and still processing the day. So when we come and ask questions, we're throwing more things to process. And the way to cope with that is I'm going to run out of the room. I'm going to go in my door. If you're an older teen, shut the door, right? I don't want to have any communication. So my recommendation is, just like the previous talked about, in terms of, what questions to ask, accept the fact that sensory dysregulation, an overwhelmed sensory system, taking longer to process sensory information is real. And I need to do something different. And so what I need to do is I need to have on my child's schedule and their routine, when they come home from school, they have snack, maybe music, or they can choose what is their quiet, sort of like uh, sensory getting back to regulation activity. And I just have to wait, right? And I can wait that 15 minutes because I haven't been battling an environment that's not fit for my sensory system. So I can wait as the adult. I can find a way for me to wait. I can choose an activity for me to do to help me wait, because for some folks, waiting is difficult. And I know you're excited about your kids coming home from school and you want to hear about their day. How are they feeling? All these things. Just give them time and appreciate that that time will actually give you more from your kiddo, because they're going to trust that you understand what they need, and then they're going to be able to have the opportunity to regulate themselves so they can come and share about their day. It's really that simple. All right, and every child's different, right? Everyone has different sensory needs. All right. So Judy says that when she is not well regulated, she is less able to engage in what's going on around me. It takes her longer to process her thoughts, and her reaction time to the spoken words of others is much slower. Her reactions to the extraneous stimuli become bigger and louder and last longer. She said she's told that her voice becomes louder and that she has a startle response to stimuli when that normally would not cause her to startle. So this is very insightful, right? Very, for me, and hopefully for you all, it's insightful because other people can see and recognize when she is in that state, right? And we all recognize it, right? We all recognize it, but we still kind of struggle with accepting that it's real and that it's serious. And for some folks, it can be painful, right, in terms of some of the sensory overload, but also the fact that your sensory regulation system is not working efficiently, it's going to impact communication. It's going to impact your response to the environment. It's going to impact whether or not your child puts their backpack away when you tell them, or whether they throw it on the floor. Because they're coming home dysregulated, they're just not able to respond in an appropriate way. I mean, that's really what's going on. That's why the visuals are so important. And this is not about visuals. However, the importance of that is because when your child comes home, maybe they don't even want to receive hello, hi, like that can just be like, oh my gosh, demand. They're going to want something from me, right? That, I mean, truly, that is how a lot of individuals feel when someone just says hello, because hello is an expectation that you have to say something back. And if you are dysregulated, if you've been working all day in the classroom to try to, pay attention, not get on red, that whole red, green light thing that drives me crazy. You're really, really pulling it together, holding it together, but you really want to explode, right? Because you really need sensory input, and your teacher doesn't understand that you need sensory input. And even though it's on the IEP, she doesn't follow the IEP. So you are holding it together because you just don't want to get in trouble, right? So when you come home, you need that time, right? Because you have been dysregulated for the majority of your day. And hello, with excitement and joy and a hug, can just be one more thing to process. I know it's hard. I know it's hard, mamas. I know you want to hug those babies. And I'm not saying you can't hug your babies. Every child is different. I'm saying, think about how your children respond when they come home. Think about how your children respond when they go into environments where there are other people, and consider the sensory component and accept that you may have to make some accommodations. And a lot of times the accommodations is simply just giving them time to process, to scan the room, to decide which kiddo they want to sit next to, right? All right. My favorite at the end is, now that we know better, let's do better, right? And the point of this series, these presentations that I am doing, is because I know we talk a lot about acceptance and appreciation, but I just feel that a lot of folks don't know what that looks like. And that's not saying anything negative. It's just we don't talk about it. And so I love to talk, and it's one more thing for me to talk about in order to help make our communities more friendly, sensory safe for our kiddos that are autistic, our individuals. And speaking of that, and I know I haven't gone to that quote yet, but speaking in terms of going into the environment, going into places, uh, one of the things that I'm like a good and a bad, right? Like I love that they have all these commercials about, oh, sensory friendly, airport room, sensory friendly at the football game, oh, we're giving these sensory backpacks. Great, right? Great, great, great. But of course, my expectations are very high when it comes to information being relayed to the public. What's happening is everybody thinks that autistic individuals have to wear earphones and cover their ears, and now autism is everybody walking around with noise canceling headphones, and oh my gosh, everybody needs to walk around with sensory fidgets, and all the kids need to have a weighted blanket, right? Like, so all of these more myths are coming out of this. So that's why the more what I know, what I can share, and you all can share. And I love that a lot of you have been putting all of these wonderful things during the month of April. That's that domino effect of sharing information to the masses, because those backpacks are great. Those sensory areas are great, but that's not the only thing in regards to sensory accommodations. Our children need to be able to move in the classroom. They need to be able to get their sensory needs met throughout the school day. And that's actually going to be my part 2 on autism acceptance regarding sensory in the educational setting, because we need to talk about this. We need to stop making everyone look like this conformist, militant classroom where everyone is doing the same thing and sitting the same way, and that's not working. And it's not working for kids who are not autistic. There are a lot of kids in the general ed setting, for lack of a better term, I use that term, but there are children who don't have an IEP or a diagnosis, and they are struggling with the sit, 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 right? It's not working. All right, so I'm going to talk about that, because if I share, then you share, and then you know what to ask for in your child's classroom setting. All right, so then this last phrase, or quote, should I say, is give your child space to share their thoughts on their own terms. You will learn a lot this way. Don't overreact. Don't get offended. And always keep your promises. So don't say something that you can't commit to, because our kids are going to tag on to that, right? You said at Wednesday at 11 o'clock it was swim class, right? So that's where the visuals come in, of course, if swim class is canceled. But think in terms of remembering your child needs space, especially when they come home from school, especially when they come home from an extracurricular activity or just playing outside, right? And we need to give them that space, because they have to get their sensory system back to regulation state, or as close as possible. And then you get so much more from them. When I used to have students in the classroom setting, one of the things that I did with all of my kids after we did a group activity is everyone had 15 minutes in their own space, because I needed them to get that time to just sort of process and sit without demands. And if we did something really, really fun, like go to the zoo and we in the car together and lots of things going on, when we came home from a field trip, literally the rest of the day was free sensory play. I mean, everyone got to go to whatever sensory activity, or some kids just like to sit in the tent because they just needed that time, that space before we moved on to another activity, or before the speech therapist came. So what I want you all to think about is, you may not always understand why your child is doing those things, or how that sensory input could be frustrating for them or overwhelming, or why they can't try those chocolate chip cookies that you love so much, or why your kid does not want to participate in the birthday party, right? You may not be able to fully understand why, because it's not your experience. But what you can do is you can just accept this is just what they need. I don't understand it, but I'm going to accept it, and I'm going to accommodate. I'm going to provide. I'm going to make sure my child's sensory needs are met. Because if I do commit to that sensory routine of activities, if I provide that regulation for them, or activities to help them regulate throughout the day, then they're in a better position to actually navigate that environment. But also knowing that sometimes even all of that, we still have to make accommodations. And I don't have the quote pulled from the blog, but Judy also tells a story in her presentations, and I think it is in her blog, that she talks about as an adult, when she goes to a restaurant, she scans and looks for the table that is going to be the most sensory safe, accommodating table, right? Which is not sitting next to a lot of people, because processing verbal input from another table makes it difficult for her to attend, respond to the folks that she is going to have dinner with, right? Also considering not being where they're bringing out the food, right? Because that's a lot of visual stimulus to process. So if you think in terms of an adult has to work hard at processing those simple things that we don't think about, imagine your child when you go to a restaurant. Of course, when you go to a restaurant, just charge the iPad. Kids don't like to go to dinner anyway, it's just for us. So charge the iPad and just have them make that iPad time, and put that within your boundaries and parameters. But also consider choosing those places, right? When you go to a public place, choosing something that has more of a sensory safe environment for your kiddo, as sensory safe as possible, right? And just bring that technology if needed, but also have those sensory activities available, and your sensory backpack. All right, I would love to share more. I can feel my voice just struggling. And I'm just so glad that you all are here, and a lot of you are here and you listen to me all the time. And so I'm trying to give new information, more information that builds on what we have already discussed in terms of the basics. And I think that I'm hopeful that we are moving towards more understanding of our kiddos and our teens and adults and their sensory needs. And the reason it's important is because many adults, one of the things that prevents them from keeping a job, socializing with friends, having a relationship, they often say it's the sensory component, right? I have a really good friend who really likes her job, but her boss wants her to do some parts of her job that provide too much sensory stimulus for her to process, right? So she couldn't stay. And so thinking in terms of that sensory component is real. And if you have adults who have to make different choices and make different accommodations, imagine our children who are neurologically immature, still working on their communication. Imagine how frustrating it is for them to have to navigate all the time in an environment that's just too much. For some kiddos, the homeschool during COVID has worked out really beneficial, right? They've been able to actually accomplish more and do more and attend more because there's less sensory input to process. A classroom of children is sensory overload. And if you've ever walked in a pre-K or kindergarten classroom, it is overwhelming. There's stuff hanging from the ceiling. There's Bobby over there running, Nancy's ponytail swinging. I mean, there's just stuff going on all over the place, right? It's overwhelming. It's a lot. So remember that your kiddos, autistic individuals are working very hard to navigate the environment, and think about what can you do in regards to accepting that you understand they will have sensory overload if you don't accommodate their needs and adjust the environment. All right, I will open for questions. If anybody has any questions, I think there's a